We're not from the government.
And we are here to help. I'm Brian Costello.
And I'm Greg Richards, and we are the Unselects. So Brian, in today's episode, we're going to kind of tie back to what we talked about in one of our previous episodes about the strategic plan. One of the key initiatives from the town was engaged and connected, which kind of lends itself to like trust and transparency. So we're going to kind of dig into that area about what the town had said that they're interested in and kind of, I think, maybe how they're performing. I will make a little statement here. If we go back to the first ever Unselects episode, one of our I guess key guiding principles was there was never going to be an election that was unopposed, and the same would be held for appointments. That if there was one of the board positions became open, that somebody should apply. So I took the onus and I did apply for an open planning board position.
And you obviously got chosen.
And I obviously did not get chosen. Yes, you're correct. I was not selected. I did learn that today, that unfortunately I wasn't chosen, but I did have a good conversation with Kevin Mizikar. So it was the first time I did talk one-to-one with him for an hour. And, some of that conversation I will use today as far as what he did tell me, because there's some things that we're going to discuss today that I did talk to him in person. So I just want people to be aware of that so that it is not, in this particular case, I'm not, guessing or, making predictions on what he did or didn't know. A lot of things I did actually specifically ask him. So it was a good conversation. I do encourage everybody out there to apply for those positions when they come up if it's something you're interested in. And I did that and, probably end up doing that again in the future. So just wanted to make a note of that. We are going to go back here to start. I mentioned engaged and connected. We talked about the strategic plan, right? And one of the things it says is here, the town is committed to transparency and operations, right? So that would be, the definition in my mind of transparency is, whatever we know, you're going to know. If we make a mistake, you're going to know about it. Am I missing anything in my definition there, Brian?
No, I think, if you say transparency, it means honesty, it means trust, it means sharing what we know. It's sharing to the town. We are representatives of you, and we will give you the information you need to be fully engaged.
Absolutely. So one of the other things that came out here, which I actually brought to show, is I don't know if you've seen this. This came out, I actually got it in the mail. All right, two things. First thing of note, I know we talked last time about Collins Center and use of ARPA funds for communication. And I actually noticed on the bottom here that this publication was made possible by American Rescue Plan funding. So back in COVID, who would have known that all that money that the government spent would end up being a flyer that was shipped to your door? But the one key part of this I do want to point out, right, is that this is about trust through communications and connections. It specifically says it from Kevin Mizikar. One of the things on here I'd like you to talk about a little bit is in the survey, which we talked about last time. That was the Polco National Survey. We went through that. We talked about where the areas that the residents provided feedback and how the town took that and put it into that strategic plan. He references it again here around, I think, making a loose connection between the actual question that was asked and trust. So can you tell us a little bit more about what it actually said and what the survey actually told us?
Yeah, the actual question was overall confidence in Shrewsbury government.
Okay, and what Kevin Mizikar says, where there was not a single question that directly asked about trust, the overall confidence was ranked fair to excellent by 88%, like you said.
Yeah.
Is confidence the same as trust?
No, of course it's not. I can be confident in something, but not necessarily be trustworthy of the people that are doing the act.
Right. Would you say that I trust the town that if I call, if there's a fire, or if I need the police, that they're going to show up?
Right.
That doesn't mean that everything else that they're doing is saying, yeah, I trust that, they're using my tax dollars or my any kind of funding properly, or that the school system is operating the way I'd like to, right?
Yeah, exactly. And if you think about it, it's if it's so important, if trust is so important, why why isn't it in the survey?
Yeah.
Right?
Right. You can just ask the question, right? Like,
Just ask the
do
question.
you trust us in town? Do you trust the government? Right. You could put that as a question, but
I think also you could put, do you trust the elected officials? Do you trust the people that work for the town? There's a big difference,
right.
right? I mean, somebody that's going to work every day at the clerk's office is pretty different than somebody that's elected. I'd love to know what people think on a trust scale of where those folks fit.
Right. So what I want to go to here is I want to go back. This was a select board meeting a few months back, and this is when they kicked off the priorities for fiscal year 25. And what it is, it's Kevin Mizikar talking about specifically this trust concept and what that means to him. So let's take a listen.
The second area is really trust, community engagement, and communication. And I think local governments across the country and across the world have had to spend some more time focused on building trust and transparency with their communities in recent years than maybe we have in the past. Civil discourse has changed over the last few years, so making sure that I'm present in the community, working through critical projects, programs, events, and initiatives is an area that I think I can do better in, and I want to focus on making sure that we have better access for the public for information, engaging directly with the community to really build that trust and transparency that we all work on a day-to-day basis.
So he wants to build the trust and transparency. He says there he could have been more involved with some of the key factors or the key projects that were going on, which is a fair, I appreciate the fact that maybe he realized that maybe showing, let's say, more leadership outward to the community. I think he's probably working a lot with the town staff, but actually then, going out and I think trying to make sure that the community understands where he stands on certain things, I think is where he's getting to there.
Yeah, for sure. And I think he means it. I think he's an earnest guy. And he is trying to say, look, you get stuck in the weeds a little bit, I think. And you do your job every day seeing the same sorts of people. And you sort of forget, oh, I'm part of this community. And I need to expand to that.
Right.
Well, part of this community from an employment perspective, obviously.
Understood. So the next piece, he kind of dives a little bit deeper here. We'll go into some specifics on the FY25 priorities on trust. So let's take a listen.
So the big area, trust, community engagement, communication, very similar to the broad focus area. I want to present myself and be more active during the major initiatives. I wish I would have been more present at some of the earlier MBTA community meetings, some of the community information sessions on the larger warehouse projects and initiatives and larger residential developments that occurred in the community. So I want to be at those and be able to provide perspective and support staff.
I liked everything except for the very end.
Yeah.
What did you hear at the very end?
I relied on other people to do my job.
Well, and he also said I wanted to support staff. No, the reason why you're going, right, and I would say this to him, I think I could probably have another conversation with him, is you're not going there to support staff. You're going there to articulate your vision for Shrewsbury to the residents who ultimately are responsible and who you should be listening to and who you serve, right? I know that in your role, you have a staff, you're hiring people, you have, whether it's the planner or the other, the people in the town hall, but fundamentally everybody in there is beholden to the residents, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. The accountability is always to the people of the town, not the people that work for you necessarily, right? You should support the people that work for you, which is sort of what he says, but you have to understand that your top priority is really that accountability to the people that live in town, which means showing up at the most important things when residents are taking time out of their lives to show up. Going back to the warehouse and MBTA and the large housing, he had said, I should have went to some of these. Yeah, you should have. Right.
And here's what we're going to go into, right? And I am going to go into a specific example of how I think we failed or that trust and transparency has been eroded. And it is around specifically the communication to the community and how they're articulating how things are going to go down. Now, this is going to be around, right, the process of the MBTA, right? Not specifically, we're not talking about the details of MBTA, but how the town is communicating it to everyone. So we're going to go back to the August 27th select board meeting when Kevin Mizikar explains what the timeline is going to look like for the MBTA article that's coming up here in the fall.
So, next item on the agenda, new business, to review and discuss the proposed timeline relative to MBTA Communities Act compliance. Mr. Mizikar.
So first, starting with the planning board, they have a regular meeting on September 5th. We anticipate, September 5th is after the 90-day window, so we hope to have any compliance model feedback from the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities for the board to consider that night.
Okay, so August 27th, select board meeting on the 5th, which they hope to have feedback so that the planning board can articulate what that article is going to look like and give that to the public. Okay. Well, what you'll see is that actually doesn't end up happening, and we'll want to dig into why it didn't happen and what they did and didn't know. Where I want to look at here is really quick, is this is the agenda for the planning board meeting on the 5th, where you can actually see one of the agenda items was to discuss the MBTA article. Myself, as well as a few others, decided to go because as a public hearing, we wanted to be heard on this topic. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to that meeting and we're going to actually see what actually transpired, because I think it's important is how this was communicated to the community. And I think how the residents were treated, or how they were somewhat, I believe, misled on what was really going on behind the scenes. Let's look at that.
In the warrant articles that we were going to have a hearing on tonight, we are not going to be hearing the article on the MBTA zoning because it's not ready.
Here's my biggest problem with that. There's an agenda that's published, and I believe they actually even update it sometimes, and maybe the day of. People plan around, I want to go to this planning board meeting on a certain day. You plan your week, you may make changes of your plan so you can attend. When you attend, the whole reason why you did that, they say, well, guess what? You don't get to talk about it because it's not ready. Sorry.
More importantly, we're not ready.
Right.
Right? Our jobs, what we're supposed to do, we didn't finish on time, and we didn't bother to tell you that till right now.
Right. And if it's not on the agenda, you can't talk about it. So they put it on the agenda and they don't talk about it. There's really no penalty. It's like, sorry, it's not ready. So I want to go and I'm going to look at my response. Actually, I did go and I asked a question, and I just want to get your take kind of on how they responded to me about asking a question that I think was potentially inconvenient to them. So let's listen.
I know you weren't going to talk about it. I do have one question about MBTA because I
We're
know
not-
it's a question. It's not about the bylaw. I just wanted a question about if we had the feedback, because on the 5th of June was when you submitted for the pre-adoption review. I don't know if that had come back yet. That was all I was. Didn't know if that was back because it's 90 days.
I don't know.
But yeah, we're not speaking on that tonight.
So was it no? We can't get an answer if it was back or not?
It's not an open public hearing.
Okay, all right, fair enough.
What's your take?
It's on the agenda,
Yes.
so technically you can talk about it. They just can't say we suddenly don't want it on the agenda. They put it on the agenda. Public meeting law allows you to talk about it, right? The bureaucrat, Mr. McGoldrick, I think he has to answer you. I think his answer, he should have known the answer. He knew the answer.
Yes, he did.
He just decided not to bother to tell anybody the answer, as far as we know, which is disturbing, right? Going back to trust in government, that's not very trustworthy.
No, it's the way you articulate it.
Right.
Because you could still say, no, we didn't have it back yet. You're not explaining the reason, which will tell you the reason, because Kevin Mizikar is going to tell us the reason for them not having it. But the way that that's handled, like essentially giving me, I just say attitude, but a little bit of an attitude.
No, I think it was attitude.
Yeah,
sure.
about, well, this isn't an open public hearing. Like, but it is.
Yeah.
It is a public hearing on it, and you just decided that no, we're not going to do that because we're not ready, so you don't get to have the hearing that was scheduled, that they have to post in papers, yada yada yada.
Yeah.
Right. So I think the way that the town, right, can improve some of this is allowing people to engage. One of the things it specifically says on this document, again, we'll go back to my flyer. It says down here, this is facilitated through an active and engaged citizenry. We look forward to building connections. Well, what better way to be engaged and active to attend board meetings and to speak at public hearings? This is what they're asking for, yet what their actual behaviors are not matching what they're claiming to be key priorities for them.
And I would argue that statement doesn't make much sense to me, to be quite frank. Trust is only facilitated through an active and engaged citizenry. No, accountability is facilitated through an active and engaged citizenry. We assume that you're trustworthy. What this almost says is, if you're not engaged, we can't promise any trust here.
Yeah, that's funny.
So it's accountability that matters most.
Agreed. Now we're going to get to a little accountability, because after that meeting on the 10th, there was another select board meeting in which Kevin Mizikar explains why we weren't able to actually answer my question that I had asked.
So I just want to recap what has happened over the last few days and clarify why the planning board did not take any action on MBTA at their meeting. So on July 19th, 2024, the town received an email requesting a revised GIS mapping file for the area that we're proposing for MBTA. Due to an error by town staff, those files were not delivered to the state until August 24th. So this error has pushed the state's pre-adoption review of the town's proposal back. Unfortunately, last week on Thursday, the planning board was in a very difficult position at their meeting because we did not know the actual impact of that error, but we had realized that the error was made and was likely going to delay the state's pre-adoption.
It's a little bit to uncover there.
Yeah.
And let me just try to walk this back and make it simple. So there was an email from the state. So they submitted, I guess we'll back up one more step. We submitted for pre-adoption on June 5th. As part of that process, they said it's a 90-day window to get feedback. The state responded in July saying, hey, we're missing a couple pieces of data. Where is it? We do not respond for 4 weeks at least. I think maybe even 5, till August 24th, which was before August 27th. August 27th was when Kevin Mizikar still said on September 5th, we're going to have a planning board meeting. We're going to talk about a pre-adoption review, right? Math isn't mathing.
Yeah.
I will say, I did ask Kevin Mizikar to clarify. I said, Kevin, I'm confused. You said, right, that you had this feedback from the state on the July, and that you knew because somebody had to respond to it in August 24th. And he said, well, I didn't know about it until the day of the planning board. This had occurred, other members of staff, right? But he goes, I'll give you my emails, right? I'll actually show you that I was not on those. And I said, I believe you. I'm not arguing that. But from the outside, and this is what I said, it looks as though you're being misleading on purpose. Because how is it possible that nobody said, like, raised a hand, or how does the staff, right, not know, hey, this is a real critical issue. If there's ever anything that comes up, you need to let me know right away.
Yeah.
Right. That's the part that I'm missing. Right.
Yeah. It comes down to, fine, he might not know. Right. But then we have to ask, who's misleading or who's incompetent? Because you should never have a situation. This is an important issue for the town. If that was sitting there for 5 weeks or whatever the number of weeks it was, and it said there was a staff error. So we have people making mistakes. We have people not telling their boss that nothing actually happened with it. And now we're running up against a planning board meeting where he has to tell the planning board, something's wrong.
Right.
Don't know what. Nobody bothered to tell me.
The day of the meeting.
Yeah.
And that actually doesn't even let the residents know that, by the way, this error occurred and we're not going to be able to talk about it.
Yeah.
This then required, a complete change, which we'll talk a little bit about really compressing a schedule to meet requirements as far as the number of public hearings and so forth before town meeting. But before we get there, I do want to go back to that select board meeting. I want to get some comments here from Beth Cassavant. I want to make a couple of comments on, once again, where I believe the focus is and what they seem to be concerned with and how I think that might be out of alignment with what we think should be should be the focus. Let's listen.
I definitely felt for the planning board on Thursday night, watching the meeting from home. I know that there were some members of the public that were interested in hearing more about the MBTA plan that evening. But again, to have a conversation when we don't have that answer from the state doesn't put us in a better position than we were in when we decided to delay the conversation in the first place. And I hope that the community does understand that sometimes a board only has the information that they have and can't provide a fulsome explanation as to why something can't be discussed.
I'm throwing a flag, a penalty flag on this one. All right, number one, the first statement she says is, I feel for the planning board. Why don't you feel for the residents?
Yeah.
Right? To me, that is so out of balance. You say, I really felt for the residents. The board, wasn't prepared to have a discussion. People came, they wanted to talk about it. But no, I feel for the planning board. And the public should just be aware that sometimes boards don't have information. Well, they had the information.
Yeah.
100%. Mo DiPaolo was the chairman of the planning board at the time, knew exactly from Kevin Mizikar or Chris McGoldrick why they didn't have that. There's no way they can say it's not ready. And if you did as a chairman, right, if you were in work and somebody that, say worked for you or a peer said you had a project you're working on and they said to you, Brian, we're not going to be able to talk about that meeting today. And you'd be like, why? Well, it's just not ready. Oh, okay, guess.
Yeah.
Are you going to leave it at that?
Yeah, feel free. Okay, fine. That's all right. Don't worry about it. All's good, right? No, that's government, right? But reality is there needs to be accountability. And I do agree, that planning board has to be there that night anyway. So they can talk about something or not talk about anything. It doesn't really affect their life, right? The people show up. Right, like you said,
right.
People actually, people with kids, people that have other, they have lives. They're not on the planning board. They make a special trip to make comments and hear what's next. And I think it was just a very bad situation, and people should be held accountable.
Right. So that leads us to the select board's perception, I think, of how big of an issue this was or how the issue was handled. So I want to listen to John Samia and his perception of how Kevin and the town had handled this. And let's just take a listen and we'll talk a little bit about whether we agree or not.
Yeah.
Planning board was in a really difficult position because we knew something was changing, but it was really inappropriate to have any discussion in public as to not say something that we didn't have full information on. And it did come out that we now know after last Thursday that will be October 15th that we have the information, and we will move forward from here.
So that was the predicate. We'll get to the Samia comment here.
That was a word salad, though.
Yeah, because the other part here is, I think he says what was appropriate to discuss in public, or something like that. You can't just say, like, why couldn't you just say, guess what? We screwed up. I'll admit it.
Yeah.
We messed up. We didn't see this email. It got delayed. But I know this because he knew this, right? There was no way we're going to meet that same deadline. There's no way, right?
Can't happen.
So you could at least say, we screwed up. We're not sure what the actual ramifications are, but it's going to be a problem, right? Yeah. So now I believe we're going to go here to what Samia's response to that was and kind of listen to what he has to say here.
As you had mentioned, the last couple of business days, the impact was no. So that's, to me, when an issue comes up, really the first point is how do we fix it? That's the most important thing. And the other piece, too, just preventing from this happening again in terms of constant communication with the state, and I know that you'll do it. But again, I appreciate the buck stops here, accountability, but at the same time, the buck stops with all of us as well.
The buck stops here, accountability. Well, the interesting part, which we'll get to, this is not the first time. So saying that, ensure this doesn't happen again, this happened before. And we'll remind people, because we've talked about this from the Maytown meeting. So this is a reoccurring pattern, which is kind of why I'm focused on it, because if you really are interested in saying the buck stops here, then why aren't we correcting this? Seems to be a consistent pattern, right, of behavior here, right?
Yeah, it's the buck stops, somewhere. Somewhere the buck stops. We'll find it someday.
And technically, right, when Sammy is saying the buck stops with all of us, I'll explain why he's 100% correct. And he, as well as the rest of the select board, bear, I believe, some of this on them, and I'll show you why. So if you look, here's the pre-adoption form. I actually put this out here of what we submitted to the EOHLC. Once again, I FOIA'd information here to make sure everybody can see it. So this was the form. And if one thing I want you to look at, right, the information about the municipal CEO. Who is the municipal CEO on the form?
Beth Cassavant.
Beth Cassavant. Now, I asked Kevin, I said, I'm confused. I thought as a town manager, you would be kind of the CEO. He says, no, the select board is the executive, quote unquote. So the chairman of the select board would technically be the CEO, which I thought, well, that's interesting. If that's the case, then Sammy is correct. Then they need to take more ownership in this process. If they're going to put your name on a form, so this is what I find interesting in government, right? Like you said, the accountability. If you fill out a form incorrectly, right, they kind of hold you to that. You don't get it to defer it to somebody else and say, well, no, I filled out the form, but really that's somebody else's job to make sure that that happens, right? It's weird to me how you can just say, well, we're the CEO, but we have nothing to do with this. It's really not on us.
Yeah, it's one of those sort of hot potato kind of deals, right?
Yeah.
So the CEO is elected by the people, but actually gives everything to Kevin and Chris McGoldrick and the rest, but then wipes their hands clean and says, well, I didn't know. It had nothing to do with me.
Right.
No, it had everything to do with you,
Right.
if we believe that this is the
Right.
way it is. And it makes sense. The select board is the executive branch
Correct.
of the town. They should actually have a lot more accountability then.
Right. I guess it's a generic form too, because it's like, hey, if you have a mayor or something like that, it would be different than in a
Sure.
select board type town. As I mentioned, this happened before. I do want to go back. We're going to go back to the select board in June when Chris McGoldrick talks about there was the multi-use pre-adoption review, or the
Yes.
multi-use submittal that we did. And I'm going to go back to that to remind people how this is a pattern of behavior.
We did receive feedback from the state on our application for the mandatory mixed-use district. That initial feedback was received, and the state determined that the district does not meet the two-part test that's identified in Section 5C of the guidelines.
And the email from Mr. McGoldrick too, like it did not meet the 5-part test. And we talked about this in a prior episode, but if you recall, he received an email the day of town meeting at 4:30 in the afternoon. And as you mentioned then, this was not talked about till the second day of town meeting. So in this particular case, what ended up happening was second day of town meeting, when this was brought up and the article was discussed, we're going to go to actually what Kevin Mizikar said, right, at town meeting, just to remind people of how this is a pattern of behavior.
Staff has completed a mixed-use district location determination form and is awaiting formal determination on this component. That determination will help staff prepare the proposal for further pre-adoption review.
So as he mentioned there, he says that they're waiting on feedback. Well, they weren't waiting on feedback. We talked about this before. Yeah. They had the feedback. We have the email. We know that they had it. And I asked him, I said, Kevin, did you know about that? Were you aware of that email? And he said, no. He actually said, I didn't even know we had feedback. And I believed him. And I said that in the last episode, I believed him. So if we're really, I guess where I'm leading to here, and we will show a little bit of a timeline just to kind of prove my point. I'm not trying to, belabor this point, but I think it's important if we want to improve. Let's take a look, right, at the timeline. May 20th, we get a rejection email. At town meeting, we don't tell people about it. So this is the first time that the trust and transparency is missing, right?
Yep.
Then we submit this pre-adoption review on June 5th on a completely new zone that we don't talk about because our rejection was given by the state prior. We don't go back to people and ask them. We submit it anyway. Then on the 11th, this was they were notified, the select board was notified. First time we heard about the rejection of this mixed use, that was the June 5th pre-adoption predicated that. On July 19th, after they submitted for pre-adoption review, that's when the EOHLC sent an email asking for more information. Then the 24th, the town finally responds. So it took us from the 19th to the 24th to actually provide what the state had asked. On the 27th, Kevin Mizikar still's moving forward with the original timeline, not aware that any of this has occurred, right?
Yeah.
Then on the 5th, the whole thing with the planning board occurs where it's like, hey, we can't talk about it, right? Refuses to answer questions, and we don't find out until the 10th about why this whole thing occurred. So twice in the same key article, the same key initiative for the town, are similar mistakes made, meaning we're not being open and honest with the town and the residents of the town about what's really happening.
Well, I think part of it is we're dealing, it seems, with folks that have no sense of urgency, right? And the longer it goes out, the less citizens actually can participate. And I think that's the thing that annoys me about this is supposed to be a participatory, framework with the townspeople. And by spending, that's almost over 2 months, right, of just mistakes, Keystone Cops kind of thing, right? And we have to get back and say, look, this prevented me from other people from actually having substantive conversations with the town bureaucrats and the elected officials to say we are still concerned about this. The longer it gets, the town meeting ain't moving, right? So the longer you don't talk about it, the more likely they can get people to vote for something without really knowing what it is.
Right. One thing I will say that I think he mentioned it too. He does mention this. The silver lining is that now we can quote unquote decouple, which I didn't show, but he says decouple the MBTA zoning article discussion from a standard planning board meeting, which to his point, if you have a bunch of other hearings in a planning board meeting, it's like 10 o'clock at night potentially before they get to this. And it isn't fair. But if you really believed that's what you wanted, why wouldn't you have done that anyway?
Yeah.
And that's what I go to. It's like, well, fortunately, there's what good thing came out of it. Well, then we should be doing that moving forward. If you really believe that people should have the time to really speak and discuss in detail the articles on the town meeting, then don't put them on the standard meetings. Do what you're doing this year. Use it as best practice. We'll see if they do moving forward, and allow people to have more specific time. So at 7 o'clock, we're only going to talk for instance, on the 17th. They're only going to talk about the MBTA article. Great. Use that as a best practice moving forward.
Yeah, free up people's time, citizens' time. Those that are interested show up. Those that don't have to.
Right. So we're just going to circle back here at the end and talk a little bit about where we're at with MBTA. I think this is just a good a time, if any, to give our opinion on things, right? So today is actually October 7th. Today, the Supreme Judicial Court of Massachusetts actually heard oral arguments in the case against Milton. So those, if you don't know, that the Attorney General did sue the town of Milton for non-compliance. And this case is essentially setting the framework for what is going to happen in the future. We do have town meeting on November 18th. And I think the only article planning related, because from my understanding in the last planning board meeting, they've moved all their articles to the spring. So it may only be the MBTA article. So a lot of focus on that. I think our belief, right, that we've said we're against it. So why don't you just really quickly tell people about, for you, why are you against MBTA and why do you believe the town meeting members should vote no?
Yeah, I mean, for me, there's a number of factors. One of them is the idea of state control over town zoning, right? The idea that a state politician or bureaucrat can tell a town specifically how they need to be zoned because their worldview is such that most towns need to be very urbanized, right? I think that's a mistake. I think we're giving up our opportunity as townspeople, as people that want to live in the suburbs. When we give the state that kind of power, they don't come back and say, hey, would you like the power back someday, right? So this is a step in the wrong direction. I think it takes away the tenor of what towns should be able to do. I think that the law in general is a very poor law, but for towns like Shrewsbury who are not even on the MBTA line, I think it's a ridiculous law because it takes away our sovereignty, right? And I think the way that people have planned the buildings in these towns, we've proven that we don't have town leaders that are actually pro-town, the life of the town, how a town should feel. We've heard it before. Mo DiPaolo saying we might lose to who?
We're competing.
Right, we're competing. Yeah, we're competing. I think we should be competing for quality of life. which isn't massive amounts of building.
Yeah, I agree. For me, I think one of the biggest things is, well, twofold. One is, it's another one of these unfunded mandates. I think it's really important for people to understand financially. It is something that has a major impact. And it really goes back to what we've talked about is, what is the net new school children, right? You talk about family units, right? We've talked about this. These are specifically for families. So you're going to have a lot of school kids. And every new school kid we add, when I've shown those numbers, is that $11,000 plus dollars. And when you look at using the town's data, and we've shown this before, it's a lose-lose proposition, right? We are not getting the tax dollars to cover the costs for school, for police, and for fire. So we're essentially adding housing that we as a town don't want, people are not asking for, and we have to pay for it, and it's going to cost us more money than what we're going to pull in. It doesn't make sense.
I think also it's wrapped in lies, right? When you listen to politicians, what they're saying is, oh, it's affordable housing. Right. We know for a fact, because it's in the law, it has nothing to do with affordable housing. When they talk about affordable housing, they're talking about extremely expensive units, even if you qualify. This isn't housing for people that can't afford housing. This is still housing regardless, that you still have to pay a lot of money for. And I think we have to fight those lies about it. We may need affordable housing. This is not it.
Right. And I think for me on the macro level is, like you had talked about it, it's for me, the way the government's behaving now is they're putting bills, they're making these omnibus bills, they're bearing verbiage and laws that people have to abide by in bills nobody's reading, right? They're passing them in the dark of night, and then they're pushing them down and saying, well, this is what you have to do. And essentially, it's supposed to be a government for the people, by the people. And what I kind of see, and this is another piece of it, is there's all this kind of legislation that nobody wants. It's not what people want. It's what special interests and other specific groups, like you mentioned, are looking for. And I don't think that's the way America should run. I don't think that's the way a town should run. And if we don't push back on it, then we might as well just tear the borders down and we'll all just be, Massachusetts residents. There's no Shrewsbury, there's no Northborough, there's no Grafton. It's just, we're all part of this big blob, and we're going to look like, in the movie WALL-E, I kind of predicated to be floating around in these little chairs, right? But with one store by and large, and then, that's it, right? I mean, I always kind of look at that. They're kind of, if you go back and look at that and watch, you'd be like, that is what they're trying to do. They're trying to make everything the same. You should, and this is what you're going to have to deal with it. You get one place, this is it, one decision, and you're done. And that's not the America that I believe in. And that's not what I think we should do. We should have a voice. We should make decisions for ourselves. And this takes that away.
Yeah, exactly. I love the WALL-E analogy. WALL-E goes from WALL-E to Idiocracy to what it became when we see him last.
Absolutely. So that's all the time we have for tonight. So please, take time to follow us on Facebook. If you do have any ideas or want to communicate with us, please feel to reach out at contact@theunselects.com. Until the next episode, I'm Greg Richards.
And I'm Brian Costello.
And we are the Unselects.